Life in Dallas, Texas, had always seemed perfect from the outside. But behind the walls of our neat suburban home, things were far from ideal. My name is Lisa, and I'm 35 years old. I work as an administrative assistant at a local office, and my life revolves around my two children, Mark and Naomi, and my husband, Alan. Alan is a 40-year-old engineer with a cold demeanor that always felt more like a distant ice than a warm embrace. Mark, my 12-year-old son, has always been the apple of Alan's eye. He's bright, handsome, and full of charm. Alan and his mother, Ruth, often dote on him, showering him with praise and affection. On the other hand, Naomi, my 10-year-old daughter, is the exact opposite in their eyes. She has dark black skin, curly hair, and a shy, reserved personality that makes her stand out in ways that aren't always kind. Alan's parents, Ruth and Henry, run a small chain of grocery stores that Alan is set to inherit. Every visit to their house is a reminder of the hierarchy that's been established. Mark is cherished and adored, while Naomi is left in the shadows. I remember the first time I saw the way Ruth looked at Naomi. It wasn't just a glance. It was a cold, dismissive stare that spoke volumes about how she viewed my daughter. One day, while I was preparing dinner, I overheard Alan and Ruth talking in the living room. Their conversation was casual, but it cut like a knife. "Mark is such a smart boy," Ruth said, her voice full of pride. "He's going to do great things, just like his father." Alan's response was equally unsettling. "Yeah, I just wish Naomi could be more like him. Maybe if she had a little more of my genes, she wouldn't be so different." He laughed, but it was a harsh, empty sound. I tried to ignore the sting of those words, focusing instead on keeping the household running smoothly. But every day was a struggle. Naomi felt the weight of their neglect acutely. She would retreat into her room, hiding from the world outside and the cruel comments she couldn't escape. Things were often worse during our visits to Alan's parents. Ruth and Henry's home was a grand place, filled with opulence and the unmistakable smell of privilege. Mark was always the center of attention, his achievements lauded, and his every whim catered to. Naomi, on the other hand, was often ignored or given terse, cold responses. I tried to make up for it with hugs and encouragement, but it was clear that her father and grandparents couldn't see beyond her appearance. One particularly harsh moment stands out in my memory. We were at Ruth and Henry's for dinner. The table was beautifully set, and Mark was regaling everyone with stories from school. Naomi sat quietly at the end of the table, her meal untouched. Ruth's eyes flicked towards her with barely concealed disdain. "Naomi, dear, why don't you eat something? You're so thin. Maybe if you tried harder, you'd be more like your brother." Naomi's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I could see the tears welling in her eyes as she pushed her plate away. Alan's silence was a punch to the gut. He offered no support, no reassurance. It was as if Naomi's pain was inconsequential to him. My heart broke for her, but there was little I could do. Alan's behavior was entrenched, and Ruth and Henry's favoritism was a constant barrier. I found solace in the small moments when Mark and Naomi were away from the critical eyes of Alan's family. At home, I tried to create a safe space for Naomi, filled with love and encouragement, but it often felt like a temporary reprieve. The turning point came one Saturday morning when Ruth offered to take Mark and Naomi to the local zoo. I should have been relieved, thinking it would be a nice day out for them. However, my relief was short-lived. As Ruth returned home later that day, she carried a tired Mark on her back but had left Naomi behind at the zoo, expecting her to find her way home alone. Panic gripped me as soon as I saw Ruth walking through the door without Naomi. "Where's Naomi?" I asked, my voice tight with fear. Ruth's response was nonchalant. "She's fine. I left her at the zoo. She can manage." Mark was tired, so I brought him home early. I didn't waste another second. I rushed to the zoo, my heart pounding with every step. When I arrived, I found Naomi sitting on a bench, tears streaming down her face. A kind zoo employee was trying to comfort her. Naomi's distress was palpable, and it was clear that she had been abandoned in a place that should have been fun and safe. Seeing Naomi in that state was a wake-up call for me. The neglect and emotional abuse had reached a new, terrifying level. I knew then that things had to change, but the path forward seemed fraught with uncertainty and fear. As we drove home, Naomi's silent tears were a stark reminder of the painful reality we faced. It was clear that my family needed to confront these issues head-on, but the fear of what would come next was overwhelming. The incident at the zoo was a turning point I couldn't ignore, but it was only the beginning of a series of painful realizations. I returned home with Naomi, who had been silent and withdrawn ever since the zoo. Her usual cheerful demeanor had been replaced by an aura of sadness that I couldn't ignore. I tried to comfort her with kind words and hugs, but nothing seemed to ease her pain. That evening, as I prepared dinner, I knew I had to confront Alan about what had happened. I waited until after the children were asleep, hoping for a calm discussion. Alan came home from work, his demeanor as indifferent as always. We sat down at the kitchen table, and I took a deep breath. "Alan, we need to talk about today," I began, my voice trembling slightly. Alan looked up from his newspaper, his eyes narrowing. "What about it?" "Ruth left Naomi at the zoo, expecting her to find her way home alone," I said. "She was in tears when I got there. This isn't the first time Naomi's been treated this way." Alan's face hardened. "I've told you before, Naomi is different. She doesn't fit in with our family. Maybe if she were more like Mark, things would be different." His words cut through me like a knife. "Different? You mean because of her skin color and curly hair?" "Alan, she's our daughter. She deserves love and respect, not cruelty." Alan's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't start with this again. I'm tired of your excuses. Naomi's not my fault. If she had been more like Mark, maybe she wouldn't be such a problem." I felt my heart sink. This conversation was leading nowhere, and Alan's lack of empathy was evident. I tried to reason with him, but it felt like talking to a brick wall. The conversation ended with Alan storming out, leaving me alone with my thoughts and fears. The following days were no better. Alan's disdain for Naomi was evident in his every action. He openly questioned her paternity, making hurtful remarks about her appearance and intelligence. I often found myself trying to shield Naomi from his harsh words, but the emotional damage was accumulating. One evening, Alan's cruelty reached new heights. He returned home visibly angry, his frustration spilling over. "Naomi's school supplies are a mess," he snapped. "Why does she need so many? She's not even trying to do well in school. She's failing, and it's time she started paying back for everything we've done for her." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Alan's words were a devastating blow. He demanded that Naomi quit school and start working to contribute to the family. It was a crushing blow to her self-esteem and her future. Naomi had always been a dedicated student, but Alan's oppressive demands were suffocating her spirit. I knew I had to take action, but fear gripped me. Our financial situation was precarious, and I wasn't sure how we could manage on our own. Alan's job as an engineer provided the bulk of our income, and I had only a modest salary. The thought of leaving him seemed impossible, given our financial instability. Yet, as the days passed, I couldn't ignore the toll Alan's behavior was taking on Naomi. Her once bright eyes were now clouded with sadness, and her academic performance suffered as she struggled to cope with the emotional weight. I felt a growing urgency to protect her from further harm. Then, one rainy evening, I reached my breaking point. Alan had come home, his temper flaring after a bad day at work. He stormed into the living room, his anger palpable. "I've had enough of Naomi's excuses," he shouted. "She's not contributing anything to this family. If she wants to stay, she needs to start working and paying us back." Naomi, who had been quietly sitting in her room, overheard the argument. She came out with tears streaming down her face. "Mom, please don't make me leave school. I want to learn. I want to be someone." Seeing her so broken was the final straw. I couldn't let Alan continue to destroy Naomi's spirit. As I looked at my daughter, I realized that our situation was unsustainable. It wasn't just about financial security anymore. It was about our emotional well-being and our right to live without fear and cruelty. In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't keep enduring this abuse and neglect. I had to protect Naomi, even if it meant facing the unknown. I resolved to leave Alan, to seek a safer and healthier environment for my children. The thought of leaving behind our home and facing financial uncertainty was terrifying, but I knew it was the only way forward. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. I gathered our essential belongings, trying to stay as organized as possible while managing my growing anxiety. Mark, who had recently moved into his own apartment, was supportive when I reached out to him. He offered us a place to stay, and his support gave me the strength I needed. With heavy hearts and rain pouring down outside, I packed up Naomi and our belongings. It was a bittersweet farewell to a life that had been filled with pain and neglect. As we drove to Mark's apartment, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of hope and fear. We were leaving behind everything we had known, but we were also stepping into a future where we could rebuild our lives and find the happiness and respect that had long been denied to us. As we arrived at Mark's apartment, I looked at Naomi, who was still apprehensive but hopeful. We were about to start a new chapter, one that I hoped would bring us the peace and love we so desperately needed. The journey ahead was uncertain, but I knew it was a journey worth taking for the sake of my children and their future. Leaving Alan was one of the hardest decisions I had ever made. As we settled into Mark's apartment, I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. It was a new beginning, but it came with its own set of challenges. Mark, at just 21, had managed to carve out a small but comfortable life for himself. His apartment was modest, but it was a safe haven for Naomi and me. Naomi was initially quiet, overwhelmed by the changes and the emotional strain she had endured. I tried to create a sense of normalcy for her, encouraging her to focus on her studies and hobbies. Mark, though young, was incredibly supportive. He made sure we felt welcomed and at ease, always checking in to see if we needed anything. As weeks turned into months, Naomi began to open up more. She started to show signs of her old self. Her laughter came back, and she regained her enthusiasm for school. It was a slow process, but each small step was a victory. Mark and I worked hard to provide a stable environment, making sure Naomi felt loved and secure. One day, while Mark was at work, I took Naomi to a local community center. They had a variety of activities and programs, including tutoring and art classes. Naomi had always enjoyed painting, so I signed her up for an art class. I watched as she immersed herself in her work, her face lighting up with the joy of creation. It was a stark contrast to the sadness she had shown during the final days at home with Alan. During this period, I also started looking for a job. The financial strain was real, and I knew I needed to contribute to our household. Finding a job was challenging, but I was determined to make it work. After several interviews and rejections, I finally secured a position as an administrative assistant at a local firm. It wasn't a dream job, but it provided stability and helped us get back on our feet. Life in Dallas began to take on a semblance of normalcy. Naomi continued to thrive in school and her art classes, while Mark and I adjusted to our new routines. We began to explore the city, discovering new parks, libraries, and restaurants. The simple joys of everyday life started to heal the wounds from our past. One day, while Mark and I were at home discussing plans for the weekend, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hesitantly, I answered. On the other end was Ruth, Alan's mother. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "Lisa, I hope you're well," she began. "I've been trying to reach you." I was taken aback. Ruth had been a harsh critic of Naomi, and I had not expected to hear from her. "Why are you calling?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wanted to apologize for how we treated Naomi," Ruth said, her voice trembling slightly. "Alan has been having a hard time since he left. He's lost his job and the grocery stores. We're struggling, and I've realized how wrong we were." I listened in silence, feeling a mix of emotions. Ruth's apology seemed sincere, but it also stirred up old wounds. "I appreciate your apology, Ruth," I said finally. "But Naomi and I have moved on. We've worked hard to build a new life, and we're finally finding some peace." Ruth's voice was tinged with regret. "I understand. I just wanted to reach out and let you know that I'm sorry for everything. I know it doesn't change the past, but I wanted to say it." We ended the call on a somber note. Ruth's apology was a small but significant acknowledgement of the wrongs done to Naomi. It didn't undo the damage, but it was a step toward closure. As we continued to rebuild our lives, I found myself reflecting on how far we had come. Naomi was excelling in school, making new friends, and developing her artistic talent. Mark was thriving in his job and had even begun to date someone he cared about. I was finding my own footing in my new job, and despite the challenges, there was a sense of hope in our lives. But just when it seemed like everything was settling, another unexpected twist emerged. Alan, now unemployed and struggling, showed up at Mark's apartment. He looked disheveled and exhausted. My heart sank at the sight of him. The man who had caused so much pain was standing on our doorstep. Mark answered the door, his expression a mix of shock and concern. Alan tried to explain his situation, but the words were hollow. He spoke of losing his job, his house, and how he had ended up homeless. He was seeking reconciliation, desperate for forgiveness. As I stood in the background, I felt a surge of emotions. Anger, sadness, and confusion swirled within me. Alan's presence was a painful reminder of the past, but it also highlighted how far we had come. The family we had left behind was now in turmoil, while we were slowly finding our way to a better future. This unexpected visit from Alan was a harsh reminder of the past, but it also reinforced our resolve to stay true to the life we had built. Naomi, Mark, and I had come so far, and the prospect of returning to the old, painful dynamics was something we could no longer entertain. As Alan left, his pleas unanswered, I took a deep breath and looked at Naomi and Mark. We had survived the storm, and we were emerging stronger and more resilient. Our journey wasn't over, but we were navigating it together, with hope and determination guiding us forward. Years passed, and our lives continued to unfold in ways I had only dreamed of during the hardest times. Naomi, now a confident and accomplished young woman, was preparing for her wedding. The thought of her walking down the aisle filled me with pride and joy, a testament to how far we had come from the dark days of our past. Mark, too, had found his path. He was well established in his career and had met someone special. His happiness and success were heartwarming to witness, and I couldn't have been more proud of the man he had become. Our new family dynamic was loving and supportive, and it was a stark contrast to the toxicity we had once known. As Naomi's wedding day approached, our lives were filled with anticipation and excitement. The preparations were in full swing, and Naomi was radiant in her joy. Her wedding dress, chosen with care, fit perfectly, and every detail of the ceremony was thoughtfully planned. I watched her with a mixture of disbelief and happiness, marveling at the strength and grace she had developed over the years. The wedding day was beautiful. Naomi walked down the aisle, looking every bit the princess she deserved to be. The ceremony was intimate, surrounded by friends and family who had supported us through thick and thin. Naomi's happiness was contagious, and it was clear to everyone that she had found someone who cherished her for who she was. During the reception, as I looked around at the smiling faces, I was reminded of the long journey we had taken to get here. It was a moment of reflection, a time to appreciate the resilience and love that had carried us through the darkest times. Naomi danced with her new husband, and Mark gave a heartfelt toast, celebrating his sister's happiness and the new chapter in our lives. However, amidst the joy, there was one figure missing from our celebration: Alan. The pain he had caused was still fresh, and the decision to exclude him from this pivotal moment was both easy and necessary. We had moved on from the hurt he inflicted, and including him in such a special occasion felt wrong. The absence of his presence was a testament to the boundaries we had set to protect our newfound peace. The final twist in our journey came when, just a few weeks after the wedding, I had an unexpected encounter. I was out shopping when I saw Ruth, Alan's mother. She looked different, older and wearier. I had heard that she had fallen on hard times, much like Alan. Ruth approached me hesitantly, her face etched with a mix of hope and regret. "Lisa," she said, her voice trembling, "I hope you're doing well. I wanted to see how Naomi and Mark are. I've heard they're doing great." I was taken aback, but maintained my composure. They're doing well, Ruth. Naomi is now happily married, and Mark is thriving in his career. We've built a good life for ourselves. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. I'm glad to hear that. I'm so sorry for everything that